Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for a conversation with Liese O'Halloran Schwarz to celebrate the release of her new novel, What Could Be Saved. My name is Talia, and I'm the events manager at Flyleaf, although I'm not at Flyleaf right now, I'm at my house. I am so excited to welcome you all to a brand new season of virtual events. We have a whole bunch of exciting things in store for you this winter and spring. Later this week, we're hosting a panel of women writers from Appalachia, and then later this month, we're welcoming Lee Vandervoo for her book about climate justice, as well as Nashville-based author Ed Tarkington for his new book, The Fortunate Ones. If any of those sound interesting to you, I encourage you to check out our Crowdcast. Above our heads, there's a little Flyleaf Books logo you can click on to see the full lineup. You can register for free for any of the events, and then you'll get an email reminder before those events take place, so that you are reminded to join us. If you'd like to support Flyleaf and our guests, please keep in mind that we do have signed copies of Liese's book, What Could Be Saved, available at Flyleaf. We are currently closed for browsing, but you can order online or over the phone. If you've already bought your copy, but you'd like to support Flyleaf, you can donate a few dollars to the store via Crowdcast. There's a button below our faces, and that enables us to continue offering programming for you. Without further admin, I will go ahead and introduce our author tonight. Liese O'Halloran Schwarz is a former emergency medicine doctor who grew up in Washington, D.C. after an early childhood spent overseas. She is the author of Near Canaan, which she published while in medical school, The Possible World, which came out in 2018, and What Could Be Saved, which publishes today. She lives right here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Liese, we are so grateful to be hosting your launch. Happy book birthday. Let's kick things off.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, what do we need to know about What Could Be Saved? Can you introduce the book?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I love Flyleaf. It's a fabulous bookstore. And this is a great bookstore, so Flyleaf is fabulous. What Could Be Saved is a novel about an expatriate family living in Bangkok, Thailand in 1972, whose child goes missing. And 40-something years later, in 2019, a man turns up to contact the sisters of the family, who were also children at the time when he went missing, and Philip went missing, claiming to be the vanished boy. So the question is it Philip who's returned? And if it is Philip, where's he been? And whatever, even if it's Philip or not, what happened to Philip in 1972?
Mm-hmm. It's been called a propulsive mystery, despite being a very literary book. How did you get the idea for this story?
Oh my God. Well, I started the whole book itself started as a very short story back in medical school. And it was just 17 pages. And then it kind of inched up to 20. And then over the years, I made it longer and longer, because I knew there was more of a story there than just the scene that I had written. And then when I sat down this time to really try to make it into a book, into a story, it was the missing piece was the missing child. I hadn't had that before. And it had previously, in all the times I'd been working on it and thinking about it, it had been set all in the past in Bangkok. And adding the current day piece and the missing child really made it into a story, made it into a book I might want to read, or a story I might want to read. And so that's where it came from.
I know you have a brief reading prepared for us. Can you set the scene for the section you're going to read in a moment?
Sure. I'm reading from pretty close to the beginning because I hate spoilers. I don't even know the books I read. I just pick them up and read them. I don't even read the flap or anything. I just read the book. I want the author to be able to tell me the story. So I will be reading a short bit from one of the early chapters, and it's in 2019, and it's Laura, the missing child Philip. His younger sister's named Laura, and she has been contacted and has decided, against her older sister's advice, to fly to Bangkok to see if this person who's come out of the woodwork all these years later is actually her brother. And it's just a little bit from the plane ride.
All right. Take us away.
Okay. I have to read slowly because my problem is I always read so fast. Everyone hates me for that. So I will incur no haters today. All right. She retrieved the bag from under the seat in front of her and then unzipped the outside pocket, extracted the manila envelope that she'd gotten from her mother's desk drawer. She punched on the reading light above her and put a fingertip to the inked whorl of the capital P. Genevieve's handwriting had always been beautiful. I should stop and just tell you, Laura is the voice, Genevieve is her mother, and Philip is the missing brother. The envelope wasn't very full. Back then, childhoods were largely recorded in memory. School portraits once a year, clusters of snapshots at birthdays or on holidays. No selfies, no burst-clicked images that could be inspected on the spot and deleted, reposed and recaptured as many times as needed to achieve perfection. How blindly Laura's cohort had fumbled through their lives, pointing their cameras and hoping. The developed film coming back weeks later with so many dud images, blurry or underexposed, eyes closed or mouth open, or hair blowing across a face. Philip's existence, as attested to by the contents of the envelope, amounted to a thin sheaf of paper. A couple of snapshots, an accordioned yellow vaccination card gone fuzzy at the folds, some newspaper clippings, and the records from his birth in 1963, in Pennsylvania of all places. Genevieve had told Laura that story, one snowy day in the Tudor when Laura was about 12. She'd come downstairs to find her mother seated with hands in her lap, staring out the sitting room wall of windows at the blur of fast-falling white. It was such a rare sight, Genevieve doing nothing, not on her way in or out of a room or the front door, not packing or unpacking or talking into a telephone while ticking items on a list. As Laura hesitated in the doorway, her mother spoke without looking over. Philip was born on a day like this, said Genevieve. Laura had gone into the room and sat down to listen to the rest. Every detail stayed with her forever after, as vivid as if she'd been there. Genevieve and Robert driving home from New England 2 weeks before Christmas, a light snowfall tumbling against the windshield, the baby who would turn out to be Philip, due in a month, and toddler B asleep in the back seat. The snow thickened and Robert adjusted the wipers. He was leaning forward to scrub the fog from the inside of the glass with the side of his hand when his wife's sharp cry pierced the quiet. Genevieve's story included the cry, not its provocation. She made no mention of pain, certainly did not hint at water breaking or other nether region events. Urgency was conveyed by other details, the snow waxing into a blizzard, the windshield whiting out, the lighted letters hospital appearing in the sky above the roadway like the star above Bethlehem, and Robert fishtailing the car onto the exit ramp, following the sign until they reached the hospital beneath it, careening through undulating drifts in the empty parking lot, right up to the building. Robert getting out of the car almost before it had stopped and running around to open Genevieve's side, helping her out. The two of them struggling together toward the entrance, pulling the door open to see the bored staff looking up from their cups of coffee. The narrative made a jump cut then, from nurses whisking Genevieve into a wheelchair to a soft-focused Philip tucked into a blue receiving blanket, 10 rosy toes at one end, and a puff of startled-looking white blonde hair at the other. Babies of that era appeared in a cloud of mystery, not mucus. At this point in the story, Genevieve exclaimed, "He looked just like a little Dutchman," and added with a low laugh, "At first, Robert thought they must have given us the wrong baby." Robert, not your father. Laura knew then that her mother wasn't telling the story specifically to Laura. She was merely telling it. A long silence had followed. Laura was caught in a blend of emotions, pinned by fascination, yet made uncomfortable by the intimacy that hadn't clearly been intended to include her. 1,000 questions crowded into her head. She felt too awkward to voice them before Genevieve spoke again. "Snow always makes me think of him." It was said almost apologetically. She smiled at Laura and got up, left the room with those words still in the air. Even at 12, Laura perceived the lie in them, and for the first time understood. Her mother was always thinking of him. The 2 photographs in the envelope had both been taken not long before Philip had disappeared. One was the school color portrait from that spring. He was wearing the sea green sweater with the crest, and his hair was slicked down and parted above his gapped smile, 2 front teeth peeking their triplicate points from his gums. The other photo was a black and white snapshot captured at a 4th of July picnic. Laura examined the rest of the items from the envelope. The birth certificate, embossed with the seal of Pennsylvania. A card with a yellowed sawtooth of Scotch tape along its top edge that had probably been affixed to his newborn crib. It featured a jaunty cartoon stork with a cigar in his beak, leering beside spaces for name, sex, length, and birth weight. The canary-colored vaccination record had scribbled impatient-looking initials and dates in the cells beside typhoid, yellow fever, polio. Clippings from the Bangkok Post and the International Herald Tribune, wearing through at the creases from having been unfolded and refolded many times. The last item was a brittle ivory onion skin sheet with a set of tiny inked footprints on it, one slightly ahead of the other, as though Philip were going somewhere on the day he was born, already disappearing and leaving tracks so they could follow. That is my reading.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Hold on one second. Let me unfocus.
I'm tiny, but that's okay.
Oh, I know. Sorry about that. I can't. I'm trying to get us the same size, and I can't figure it out. But that's fine. You can be big.
I can be tiny. I can be big. Doesn't matter.
All right. So this book goes back and forth in time and place. Could you tell us a little bit about the research that went into it?
Oh my God, so much. I mean, when I lived in Bangkok, I was really young, so my memories were child's memories. I also was writing from the point of view of adults. There are a lot of adult characters in the book, and I needed to have some idea of what Bangkok was like for adults, what they saw. We were pretty protected. But so over the years, I read just innumerable nonfiction books. I've always done that, read a lot of nonfiction just in hopes it will mean anything someday. Like I just want to put it all into a pot in my head and let it sort of stew. And so I actually have some books with old maps of Bangkok, like old Bangkok because it's changed, and oral histories. Those are really great because you get to hear just this rich, it's not polished language, but it's really rich, telling you how it was, not only for those in Bangkok, but I do have a character in the book who comes from a rural part of Thailand. And so I learned some about what her life might have been like. And I actually had a section that talked a lot more about that. And I did cut some down. I think there's an entire second book made of all the stuff I cut out. But anyway, I think the most helpful thing at the end when I was writing this draft, after I had figured out that a child goes missing, and was YouTube. YouTube is really great. They're just, oh my God. Apparently a lot of people had a little camera in Bangkok, like the soldiers on R&R. And so they took footage, and a lot of it was soundless, but you would just see snippets. There's just snippets on the internet, on YouTube. And so sometimes I would just watch hours of YouTube, just watching these images to give you a sense of what the buildings, refreshing my memory, getting a clearer picture of what the buildings looked like, what people were wearing in the 60s and 70s. So and I would put it all in my head, and I wouldn't write right away. I would wait and let that section sort of macerate until I had a pool to draw on. It was really fun. Like you're watching YouTube, and that's considered writing. It really is. Almost everything is considered writing, frankly.
Yeah.
There was a lot of research.
Yeah. How old were you when you lived in Bangkok?
Up until the 8 years old. So I was there probably from 5 to 8. I think that this timeline's a little fuzzy in my head, but we were in Africa first, and then we came back, and I lived in Pittsburgh for a short time. So I knew what snow was when we came back, and then we went to Bangkok. So I wasn't there very long. It had a huge impact on my family because we loved it. We loved Bangkok. It was a wonderful place to grow up, to live.
Yeah. It sounds like such an interesting childhood to grow up in all the different places, very different places.
Yeah, I'll say, especially back in the internet world.
Yeah.
I mean, back then it was like you were going to the moon. So.
Yeah, totally different culture. And I'm sure, you become very disconnected from the part of your life that came before, especially as a child at that time period.
That's right.
I have a couple more questions for you, but I would like to just quickly give notice to everybody watching. If you have any questions, you can use the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screen or just the chat. And in a few minutes, I will pose some of those questions to Liese. So if you have anything you'd like to know about the book or about the process, anything like that, go ahead.
Yeah, the process.
Yeah,
Ask me a question about the process. Grueling. I suffered terribly. Just kidding.
Well, we do have one more question. What were some challenges that were part of this book process in particular?
Oh man, I think that the challenges of writing a book, there are just so many. But for me, my particular dysfunction is that I don't like to plan ahead when I write. So I like to have some idea of where I'm going, but I like the writing to surprise me, which means that it's extremely inefficient. And I write a lot of extra stuff that then I get like ridiculously absorbed in and fond of. So there's a large process of kind of cutting and crying at some point in the future. And I know it's going to happen, but I just, that's my process. I mean, I would love to sit down and start a book and write until it is done and then we're done with the book. That would be awesome. But there's a lot of finding my way. I learn a lot. My characters, it's almost like psychotic. My characters do things and say things I didn't intend for them to say, but it sounds right. Sometimes they do and say things that don't make sense and they just sort of sound pretty, the language. And that's another part of it, is that I get wedded to my language and I have to be very harsh. And so I actually told my editor, you need to be mean to me because I don't know when I'm being self-indulgent sometimes. Like, it's really hard to know if something I've written works for me, but only me. So he was very kind about it, but we did end up throwing away a chapter I still mourn and will never, I mean, I love that chapter, but he's right. It didn't serve the book. So I still think about it, but yeah, so that was one of the major pitfalls for me, was just reining myself in and getting the book where it needed to go. I think everyone has that problem, unless they're like a psychopath that writes one word at a time, but maybe they're out there. I don't know. And bless you if you are. I'm more like a Roomba.
Did it take a while to strike that balance with your editor, like to figure out sort of the line of how to negotiate cutting?
Not really. He's incredibly gentle. He's not a hardline type editor. So he would say a couple of things. And for instance, we had a disagreement about the ending of the book, the very ending. And I wanted something. He would point out things that I knew were weak, and that was helpful, but he didn't push me on things. He was really respectful, but he was right. He wanted the ending to be different. He wanted the piece at the ending. I wanted a piece at the end that it was more artistic. It was like, oh, it's so beautiful. It's a wonderful shimmering note to leave the book on. If you're reading a book, it's like, oh, how lovely. But he said, and he didn't force but he sort of said, well, I think for a reader, it's really far more satisfying to have the story end just right before that. it was like a separate piece at the end. He said, I think it would be more satisfying if it just ends without that separate piece. And I was like, no, I must have it. And it is so important. And then while I was writing, he said, well, I would never, try to tell you this is your book. And then, of course, as I'm writing, I was like, oh, he's right. And so I just, at the very last revision, I just tucked it in. I pulled that piece I loved so much and tucked it in earlier in a place where it really worked very well. And I really agree. He's right. He was keeping in his head what the reader's experience would be. And that's the part that I try to keep aware of that constantly. I mean, every punctuation mark, I'm trying to be aware of what is the reader reading and how is the reader interested, or what is the reader seeing? But I was being really self-indulgent, and he stopped me because he's awesome. And I'm grateful. I still mourn that missing chapter, but he made up for it with that piece of advice.
It sounds like you're probably a pretty easy author to work with if you're, you take the critique and you internalize it and think about it and then come to it on your own a little bit.
I think so. I think we're also, we work together well. I mean, I think if anybody tried to push me on something, I would not be an easy author to work with. And I've just been lucky that I've had really kind, sort of smart editors who they seem to know that they can just sort of nudge, and if it's the right thing, I'll go that way. So I've been lucky, very lucky.
Yeah. How would you compare this writing process to the past couple of books that you've written? Because I know this is your third book. What became easier? What became more difficult as you worked your way to your third novel?
The first book was, I don't know what was going on there. I was a medical student, and I was trying to figure out how to write a book. I'd never written fiction before. So I like the book a lot. I do, but it's 30 years ago. And when I read it, it's amazing to me how British my language still was, even though I'd been in America for so long. And I thought I had completely assimilated, but I'd read so many British books, and, so I just had this really weird patois, which I still love, but I like that book, and I'm fond of it. I'm proud of it. But I think I read a lot between that book and the next book, which was The Possible World 2 years ago. And I think reading, it takes apparently a lot of reading to teach me some very basic things about story. And it's really important I had to learn in a very real way, not just a theoretical way, but a very real way, that the reader, this book is for the reader. I'm not trying to create, I like to think of some of it as art, because I do like some of the language and all, but I'm not trying to create just a piece that provokes comment. I want it to be absorbing. I want the person to be like, shut up, I'm reading. I love to read. And when I was young, the feeling that I had a good book to get back to, it's the best feeling ever. And when I was young, I told myself, I want to do that. I want to make somebody feel that way, where they're like, oh my God, I just can't wait to get through with all these things I have to do so I can get back to that book. And so keeping that in mind, if that's your goal, I had to learn to focus on telling the story. It's also really hard to tell a story, it's hard, but I think eventually I think I've gotten somewhere farther down the road in all that time. So, and I think this one, when I got the idea of the missing child, the writing went pretty fast.
Yeah. I was thinking we could dive in. That's actually a great bridge to dive into some of the audience questions that have been coming through. So you mentioned that once you've had that missing child strand, that sort of allowed you to feel like you had the story. So I have a question here from Allison who says, how much did you plan the whole story before you wrote the novel? Did you outline the entire plot or just let it unfold as you were writing?
Such a good question. I mean, because that's really the bottom line for writers. Like, do you plan or do you just go by the seat of your pants? I would say I try to plan and I end up going by the seat of my pants. Like I found that, I mean, with these last two books, about a quarter of the way into the narrative or into the process of drafting, I know what the ending is that I'm trying for. When I start, I don't really know the ending. I may have some idea, but I'm not positive. And I don't know how it will exactly come out, but it really helps to have the end because then you can write toward the end. But I revise, I mean, with The Possible World, there was a lot of structural changing before I finished that book. Like I had to move things around because it was a difficult story to tell. But this one, I knew I was going to do the alternating timeline. It just felt right to me. It really, it felt right to me. But so I learned a little bit, but I think I knew how I wanted to tell the story. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. You know, I was like, I had some idea. It's like you heard a rumor. I heard a rumor that this happened, but I don't know the details. And I'm like, okay, now I got to write the details. That's what it was like.
So your pants are only on the details.
I have some idea, but like stuff happens like even at the very last revision, because I revise a lot. I will draft not seriously quickly, but I'll draft remarkably fast sometimes. But then I revise, for the rest of my life. I would still be revising if they hadn't made me, give in the final copy.
Yeah, that's why you're on a deadline.
That's right. Deadlines are really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We former medical students like deadlines.
Right. It makes sense when you think of your past career.
Right.
So I have another question here from Susan, who says, she already identified you play with time in this book and in your past book. So she asked, what does the shifting perspective mean to you, or why do you use that structure in your book?
I did it a lot with the first book too, the shifting POV, because I know I did it in the first book because I really don't think that one person knows the whole story. And I did it in this book for the same reason. I have not changed at all. I think the reason why is I want the reader to feel privileged to know the whole story in a way that no one in the book. It's like the reward for reading. It's like, okay, you've spent hours staring at this book, and now you know all about things that no one else in the story knows. And it's that bit of, irony that I think I just enjoy it when I see it in other stories. So I do like it. I think I've actually told myself that the next book is supposed to be one POV. Because I want to play with that too, but it's just so delightful to be able to shift back and forth. But the hard thing is when I'm reading a book that shifts POV, I'm like cussing at the writer. I'm like, God damn you! I liked that person. Why are you talking to me somebody else? And then you get to like the next person, and I want that little ridge between them in the reader's mind to feel less as little pain, the smallest amount of pain I can give. It's why I had to smooth them really carefully. I'm not sure it worked completely, but I hope it wasn't like being wrenched out of a narrative the way that it is for me sometimes when I read multiple POVs. So that's my goal.
I think it also really, it sounds like you're aware of the idea that the reader wants to come away from the story feeling like they know everything, or they have multiple perspectives on the actual truth of the situation. And I guess writing one POV is sort of coming to understand that you never really have the whole picture, and being comfortable with that. So I guess it's,
right.
Do you feel like you have, when you read, do you enjoy single perspective stories, or do you feel like you need to have the whole picture to really feel like you're getting everything?
I'd rather have single perspective in a lot of ways, but I know that a lot of books I've enjoyed a lot have been multiple POV. I want to fall into a book and I don't care how much I know. So I think, you know what I mean? Like, I think I'm not serving myself when I'm doing this, but that's why I would like to try the challenge of doing a one perspective all the way through. It's also just really interesting to tell things from different perspectives. And sometimes events happen that the character you might have chosen as a POV has no idea of. So in this book particularly, it needs the POVs, I think, because so much is going on. And the whole story is just a construction of a million different secrets. It's like it's not like, some kind of a thriller, I don't write like thrillers where it's not like that, but it's everybody's hiding something from everybody else. And they can be small, little tiny things that you think are not important, huge things that are really important. And then oddly, the little tiny things turn out to be the important things, and the big things actually aren't that important at all. So I think in order to tell those secrets to the reader, you have to have different points of view. So
yeah, absolutely. Speaking of the characters all having their little secrets, I have a question here from Danielle, who asks, which character ended up surprising you the most?
That is such a good question. Oh my God. I would say, which character surprised me? Probably Beatrice. Because when I first started writing the book, Beatrice was almost only what you see Laura tell about her. Beatrice is the older sister, and Laura is her younger sister. And I wrote a lot of Beatrice that is not in this book. It's in the book in a way, but it's not in the pages. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I got to know Bea a lot better, and I was surprised by what I learned. I started out she was really a foil for Laura. She was an opposite to her. They brush up against each other. They have a little bit of friction, and eventually Bea established herself, having her own motives, her own thoughts, and becoming a real character. I love her. I love all my characters, but I was happy that she achieved that on her own, because she was the slightest character in some ways until then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the book begins from Laura's point of view, so you only see her in that light for a while. So it's good to know that she develops, for some of the people here who maybe just starting the book. Good to know that you're gonna watch Bea become her own person.
Right, you're gonna understand her.
Right, absolutely. As the characters in the book are children who grow up in Bangkok, and you and your siblings also did, I have a question here from Catherine and Charles, who say, which of you remembers Bangkok the best? Do you feel like is it you, or is it one of your other siblings?
It might be my older sister. She remembers some things better, but I have a really sticky memory. So I think it's quite possible. I think we all remember different things. I think it's quite possible that I remember the most, partly because I've sought to try to remember. I've sought to reinforce all of those memories. I've been thinking about Bangkok and reading about it and thinking about our experiences and my memories there for so long. So I think it's me, but occasionally my sister will pop up with something, because she was not much older, but older enough. She'll pop up with a fact. I'll be like, that happened? She's like, oh yeah, you don't remember that? I'm like, no, I don't have any memory of that. So that was also part of this book, was that things happen in children's lives, and the children don't necessarily carry that memory forward. There are a few cases in this book, a few examples of that, where something really startling happens, and you would think that that child would remember that forever. But oddly, the adult person remembers like their mother peeling them a tangerine, like a completely pointless memory. But I think if I have a point with all that would be to say that all of the memories matter, even the ones before you start laying down memory. It all matters. And I really liked that Laura doesn't, as a grown-up, she doesn't remember a lot about her childhood. And then you go back as a reader and you see crystal clear what she was experiencing, how important it felt to her, all these thoughts and feelings she had. And my argument is that they don't go nowhere. They're still in you and they're in your life. Your early memories matter, even if you don't carry them as an adult. So I don't remember as much as I'd like, but I have some really wonderful memories, which I've hung on to.
Yeah, and it sounds like just absorbing the kind of context of that time period, whether it was from books or YouTube or whatever, sort of helped reinforce or, recreate in a way some of those memories for you. And that sort of reminds me of, even in the part you read, it's like this memory of someone else's memory becomes your memory. And I think it's interesting how you play with that a lot, with the multiple perspectives and the parents telling children's stories or thinking about memory as it was preserved in the 60s and 70s versus now for children, I think is a really interesting theme that I see going through your book. That definitely is really interesting to look at more closely. And so I'm glad that you've talked about that a little bit. And I hope that people reading pay attention to it.
Well, it's funny because I don't even realize sometimes it's not always intentional, some of the things that come out. And then you're like, wow, I must seem like a genius to other people because I did not intend this, but look at how it all fits together. There are some things that obviously I created intentionally, but for instance, that memory, that the part that I just read, it does reflect. That's one of the things I wanted to do with this book was I really think the books I love the most are the ones where I think of the storyline as a sort of a spine, like a feather or a comb. And then all of the little bits, they curl back around to the comb. So everything in this book curls back around to the spine of the story. There really isn't a lot of free floating stuff. I don't mind digressions and things, but I just love the idea. And I think it's because I like the idea that the world is neat and logical when it's actually just a chaotic mess. But, that's why we read books. We don't want to necessarily read about how terrible things are. You might want to read about something that, makes you feel good about the world. And even though there are a lot of grim themes in this book, it's not a light book. It's definitely got a feeling of optimism, or it should create a feeling of optimism in the reader, I hope.
Yeah, I think it does. There's actually a question here from Anna Lee that is, did your perspective of the story, and this sort of ties into what you were just saying, did your perspective change in the context of the pandemic or 2020 as a year with all of it? I know that I'm sure the book was written before 2020, but did this year change how you view the story at all?
That's a good question. I think I was revising it. I did the final revisions during the pandemic, because time's really blurry for me. I mean, my most quotable thing I've said all year is that every day is Blur's day, because I just can't figure out what day it is, what the hell's going on. But so I do know that I was writing in a coffee shop. I love to revise in a coffee shop. It takes me out of the house, and I don't have my dog begging me to walk her or pet her or feed her or whatever for a few hours. So I get a few hours alone in a coffee shop working. And I lost that, because I mean, it's such a small thing to lose for the pandemic, but I lost that small thing that took me out of the house into the world. And I think, that's how I know that I was revising during the pandemic, because it all feels like a big blur. But I would say that the thing that has been the most remarkable for me, two thoughts. One is the world before the internet is just, I mean, it's gone. It's a lost world in for so many of us. And it's precious and it's quaint and it's sweet. But I think about how this pandemic might have happened without the internet. I mean, we need, although the internet does bad things, obviously, the way that people can join together, the way that people can work remotely, that's just fantastic. So I thought about how this world, in this book, is such a little bubble. These people went off, and as I said before, going to Bangkok in that era was like going to the moon. I mean, people just forgot you existed. You were just out there. And I mean, it wasn't, I mean, you had letters, you could send the letters, or, there were phone calls, I guess. But the point was that everything is really connected right now. And I think that has helped us in many ways, as well as harmed us, because there's so much traffic that people carried the virus. And also there's a lot of bad purposes to which the internet has been put. But I feel like we won't ever be as isolated again. And I think that's actually better. And the other thing was that I was so thrilled. I sent this book. I gathered up all of my bravery and courage, and I sent this book, or I sent an email to the agent of a writer I really admire, and I asked if she would be willing to read it. And I know people, they don't have time. They're busy. They're writing their own books, or they're reading, or they're hiding under the bed because they're worried about COVID. Everybody's got stuff. So I didn't take it personally if she had said no. I expected her to say no, but Lisa C said, sure, send it on. She said, I gave her a little bullet point, and her agent sent it to her, and she said, sure, send it on. And one of the things when she wrote back, she liked the book, she blurbed it, she's so kind. But one of the things she said in her email back to us was that this is during the beginning of the pandemic, or during the kind of settling in period. And she said it just took her away from all of that. And so I do see the book differently. I always want a book that I write to take somebody away into a cave where they don't want to do anything except read the book. Like, obviously, I want to take over your life. But to know that it took her away from the really difficult time. And one of the people at Simon & Schuster actually said, Wendy, who's just been wonderful about this book, she said she couldn't read anything, and her job is reading books, and she could not focus because of the pandemic. And then my editor gave her this book and the early manuscript, and she fell in. She said, I couldn't stop reading it, and it was the first time. So I do think of the book differently. I wouldn't necessarily have thought of it as such a propulsive, they call it propulsive novel, but apparently it really is absorbing, and which is all very exciting. It's kind of like a big stream of bragging I just did, but
you're allowed to. It's your day.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of
butterfly. We got to look at the butterfly for a moment. I love that butterfly.
It's gorgeous.
It is. It's so pretty.
Yeah, you lucked out. It's a good cover. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about how this pandemic might have felt if it happened 25 years ago, but it's pretty intense to think about that the connection we have now wouldn't have been possible. And there's actually a moment early in the book when you sort of refer to this time, this crazy advance in technology when Laura FaceTimes or Skypes with the man who has come out of the woodwork claiming to be her long lost brother. And she makes this observation that, that would never have been possible,
That's right.
In the past. And now it's a click of a button and you're connected to Bangkok. Whereas, before that, it was like going to the moon.
That's
So
right.
it's pretty incredible to think about how far technology has come. And the stories we're then able to tell are very different as well.
It's true. And I think, obviously we can get a lot more remote work done now. I mean, there's something to be said for that sort of slower life. I am allowed to be nostalgic about it because I don't have to live it now. But you know how when you look back, something is just dreamy. It's like, oh, it's so lovely. It was so lovely. Well, I think things are so much easier now. I mean, in so many ways. I won't even, let's just talk about traveler's checks. I mean, what the hell? We used to have to sign all these pieces of paper and then carry them around, hope no one stole them from us in order to have any money anywhere. And now it's like the first time I went overseas and used an ATM card, I was like, are you serious? I mean, I was in Vietnam at one point, 10 years ago. And the ATM was like, hello, Liese O'Halloran Schwarz. And I thought, oh my God, this little ATM in like the side street in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, knows who I am. I mean, it was really cool. So yeah. I love technology. So I love all the changes. I really do. But there is some part of me that realizes that I'm maybe too dependent on my phone. And the thought of losing power or the internet like panics me in a deep way. Whereas before I'd be like, oh, I'll just read a book. But now I'm like, I have to read a book with the internet. I just need it around.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
All right, let's do a couple more questions, and then we'll look toward wrapping up. I have a question here from Jen, who says, can you talk a bit about the DC strands of the book and how you came to be interested in setting part of the story there?
Hi, Jen. I wrote the book. I put the book in DC because that's where we went when we came back. And I think of DC as my hometown. And DC is a really unusual place, as anybody who lives there knows, for this kind of person, this expatriate who comes back to America. DC is a transient place. It's a place where everyone's from somewhere else, or at least a certain part of DC, not all of DC. But the part of DC that I grew up in, people were from everywhere. And that was very much like a continuation of my being, living in Bangkok and knowing that home was somewhere else. But honestly, I remember when I was little looking at a map, like there was some sort of map, I can't remember, on TV or the wall, and I always looked at Bangkok first as the center of the world. And then when we moved back, I had to learn to look at America, sort of put that first in my head. And I think in DC, people come from so many places. And I think the culture shock, actually, when we returned here, was kind of really buffeted by the fact that so many people were from other places too. So I really didn't hit culture shock for a long time. But I chose DC because, I mean, I love DC. And also it allowed some of the characters to do some of the things that they do. And I don't want to be too specific, but a couple of characters have jobs that really need to be in DC. I also think DC is I've been there recently, obviously. And I think it's gotten so much nicer since I was a child. There's, it's kind of tech smart, and it's got a lot of books and a lot of bookstores, a lot of activities. And I like the idea that Laura, who could live wherever she wants and could do whatever she wants, chose to come back from New York to DC at one point and find her life there and live almost like a young person without a car, So I like DC as a city. So that's why I chose DC. It's nice to write about home.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good reason. And I think, you read so many books where people move from faraway places to small towns and then feel like an outsider. But DC, you're right, it's a place where you don't need to feel that way because everyone is.
Right.
there's no native DC culture in the way that like
There,
if you
there
came
is,
to
but not in this part of the world. I mean, there's
right.
a whole part of DC that we weren't privy to.
Mm,
Just a whole section of DC that we just didn't. We weren't. It wasn't part of our world.
right.
But you're right. Like for the expatriates,
Right.
the politicians or the diplomats, it really is just a mix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Big
I was
mix.
thinking it would be very different than setting the U.S. home in like a rural southern town. That would be very
Right.
different. Uh,
Absolutely.
there would be much more of an outsider kind of feeling. So you put
Which
it
would
in
be my
a
first
place
book.
right,
My
exactly.
first book's about an outsider in a small town in the South. Definitely.
Well, you've already done that then. You don't need to do it again. Um, okay, and then one more question from Catherine is, when did you know you were a writer?
This sounds so terrible, but I was 3. I mean, I wrote my first book when I was 3. My mother was so mad at me because she'd just gotten me a tablet of paper to draw on. She'd gone into the store and she'd gotten us tablets of paper. And I said, I'm finished with my mama, like in a couple of days. And she was annoyed. She's like, are you kidding me? Did you like, and then she told me the story, later, because I still have it. She kept it. She opened it. She realized I'd written a whole book. And of course it was a really powerful story. No, it was, I'd written the history of the whole world. I was nothing if not like
Very ambitious.
Yeah, history of the whole world, including my representation of God. God was apparently a head with a halo on a rock. He was just a head on a rock for some reason, and with lots of clouds. So anyway, I wrote the whole story of the whole universe, which was as I knew it. I was pretty young, but I think I always knew I wanted to write. I think it was just very, very hard to imagine wrangling as many words as you need to wrangle to write a book. And I can't tell you how glad I'm doing it, but I think I'm very grateful to software, because otherwise I would be typing out and then throwing things away. You know how on the TV and the movies, they show somebody with 1 million balled up pieces of paper. I would have rooms of balled up pieces of paper because I couldn't bear to have something imperfect. So thanks to software, I can just put a digital mark on it and say, come back and fix this and keep going. So
yes, you'd have filled so many tablets at this point.
it would be a crime is what would happen. It would have been a crime. And I used to kill a lot of trees with all the paper. I used to print everything out. In the old days, I had to print it. I had to see it. I couldn't work on a computer. In the old days, we didn't have the computers the way we have now, but I had a word processor. I couldn't work like that. It had a screen, but now I'm very, very comfortable with it. So I think, so I think that I always knew I wanted to write. And at first it was poetry. And then I think the least talented person uses the most words. And I have graduated to the bottom of the heap because I started as a poet and I tried some short stories and now I'm in a novel. So I'm just becoming progressively less talented.
Well, but I think most people prefer to read novels over poetry and short stories, or at least our, book sales would indicate that most people gravitate toward novels. So, in some ways, it's a progression, not a regression. So I'd be careful before you put yourself down for that.
In some ways, but I'm happy because I like to fall into a book. I love to read a book. When I like short stories in some ways, but you feel like you're just getting into it and then it's over and you're like, wait, are you kidding me? I need more. So
absolutely. All right, so we're gonna close out with a few sort of questions about your reading and your writing, because those are so appropriate send-offs for an author event. Can you tell us, are you working on anything new? We had a question from Emily, who was, given when the possible world arrives, can we expect another book in about 2 years?
Oh, that would be nice. Actually, I was on track for that. But the pandemic kind of derailed me. My next book that I was working on, and I don't know if I'll go back to it or start something else, but the next book I was working on, it was actually a bit of speculative fiction with one POV, although kind of not really. Haha, I'm not telling you what I mean by that. But, and it's set in the near future. And I had a good bit of it written, but the problem is now that along comes the pandemic and changes everything, changes the landscape, every landscape of everybody's life. So when this is all over, what I'm trying to figure out what will be there, so that I want to write this, I want to set it post-pandemic, but I have to figure out how long post-pandemic. It's not science fiction. It's a little bit of, it's speculative, but it's not pure science fiction. So I'm not going to have people zipping around and, it's not going to be one of those, but I need to make it a recognizable landscape. So I've been really mulling hard on what parts of our society pre-pandemic will be the same post-pandemic, what might have changed. And just like with this book, where I knew just so many things after reading all that, but they didn't make their way into the book that might have informed the book. I don't think I want to pick two things and then make those true. I think I really want to have a good sense of what this world will be like that I want to set this story in, which will have, well, it might have something to do with the pandemic, but not in an active sense. I don't want to read about the pandemic. I don't want to write about the pandemic. I want it to be over. And, good luck to all the people who are writing about it, because I'm sure you'll do great, but I'm not going to be ready to read about it for a while,
Yeah, I think a lot of people are sort of on your side with that, where living through it is, enough intake of pandemic for a while. It's going to be a while before people are ready to dive into a fictionalization of it.
Right.
Is there anything else that you're looking to explore in future writing beyond the single POV that you mentioned?
I think I'd like to go back. My first book was about men. It was largely in the voice of men. I'd like to write another book in the voice of a man or men. Probably there are men in this book, and I really enjoyed writing them. It's hard. It's a difficult thing to do. So I'd like to write a book from the point of view of a man. If the right story comes along, then I will want to put it in the POV of a man if it will work. So there's that. I'm not sure that I'll write another family saga, but I enjoy writing the sagas. I enjoy writing the story. I mean, that, the stories that take place over a period of time. So I'd like to write one that's crisper and takes place in a shorter period of time and without quite as much backstory, so that you really are sort of zipping ahead. It may be a reaction to this, which really was a lot of work. And I keep telling myself that I'll sit down and I'll write the book, and it'll, all the chapters will just mount up like on TV shows or movies, and then I'll be done. So we'll see. But I like to do everything I haven't done yet. So that's a lot.
That is a lot. Well, you've got time. And last question, we're going to wrap up.
Okay.
What are you currently reading?
Well, I brought this book because I bought it at Flyleaf. When I came to sign books there, I couldn't resist. Sugar Cane, and everyone probably has heard of this. It's a Booker Prize shortlist, and I think it won the National Book Award. Finalist for the National Book Award. It just finalisted and shortlisted and everything. And I have no idea what it's about, but don't tell me, because I like to read a book just to find out. So I'm I've already read just a few pages because I got it just the other day, and it's fabulous. Already you're reading it. You're like, I don't really care what it's about. You just tell me this story. I will listen. So there's that. I also read this book, The Babysitter, My Summers with a Serial Killer, which is, I mean, if you don't know me, you think, well, that's pretty out of your wheelhouse. No, I read like almost everything. So I will read, I mean, genre doesn't, because you learn stuff and it's interesting. And this book, The Babysitter by Liese Rodman and Jennifer Jordan, there are two names. It's really interesting. I read this like last week, and it's an arc. It doesn't come out. I don't remember when it comes out. It comes out in a few months, but on March 2nd. But the thing that's really fun about this is it is the story of Liese Rodman, who she was babysat, like looked after by one of the worst serial killers on Cape Cod, like the Cape Cod vampire. Horrible. Like the actual details are shocking. And Jennifer Jordan they write alternating chapters, although it's not jarring. You wouldn't even have to know it was two people. You could just read it without feeling jarred. But one chapter is from the point of view of the child talking about her experiences. And the other is all the stuff a true crime person wants to know about this serial killer. It's actually really well written. And I never even knew about this case. And I found it really interesting. So I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy it. So that was a fun experience. And a recent book that I would recommend, I don't have it with me right here, is The Boy in the Field by Margot Livesey.
Mm-hmm.
That was just lovely. That was like poetry. The language was so beautiful. It was so filled with that thing I love so much, which is sort of a nostalgia. I love the nostalgia for something you didn't actually experience. It's what I want. It's what I want to inspire with my books, especially this one. And I felt it with Margot Livesey's book. I didn't live the children in the books. I didn't live anything like their lives, but I felt this deep nostalgia when I read that book, and it was lovely. So The Boy in the Field, I think that's been out for a while, and it deserves all the accolades.
Yeah, I think it was on some of the Flyleaf Best of the Year lists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a very pleasurable read. And I actually finished this book, Cobble Hill, by the woman who wrote Gossip Girl.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a light sort of comedy of manners set in Brooklyn. And I'm doing an event with her in a couple of days. And so we read each other's books.
That's
and
fun.
It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's very crisp. It's just, there's some parts of it that are so funny. And it was just a really delightful read. So, plus a little bit of nonfiction, but it's just me.
You got to bounce around, do all the genres for sure.
Yeah,
I'm the same way.
I'm trying to read everything, but someday I will, my life will end and I will still have books on the TBR list, which is killing me.
Of course.
So got to get to them. I know.
That's life.
Yeah.
I'm sure that just from the books I've accumulated working at a bookstore, I've already got books that I'll never read in my life.
Right. And when I realized that, I was really sad about myself. When I realized I own books I'll never read. That's depressing.
Well,
thanks.
It's great note to end on. Yeah. Thank you for the book recommendations. I'll have to pick up The Babysitter. That sounds really interesting. So we're about to close out the event. So I'd like to just end with a few reminders for our audience. If you'd like to order a signed copy of What Could Be Saved, you can click the link just below our faces. If you missed some of our conversation tonight or you'd like to share with a friend, it will be available as a recording. So as soon as we wrap up, you can just refresh the page and then it will change to a video and you can share the link with anybody you like. And please do check out our schedule for upcoming events because I'm really looking forward to the season and I hope some of y'all will be able to join us for those future readings and conversations. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. Thank you, Liese. It was a great conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for everyone for coming out and Thank you so much, Flyleaf, for supporting this book
Of course.
as you always did, as you did the last book too. So I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. And thanks for the tech. All the tech, she had to walk me through the tech on this one. So thank you very much.
Crowdcast can be hard.
It is. I'll get used to it. Thank you, Talia.
Bye. Have a good night.
Bye. Bye.